Tyrone Bowman Live. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome to the program. Today I'm going to talk about an article as recorded and written in the Dispatch concerning world events. The title of the article has World War III begun. Not yet. But the international order is bifurcating. And I'm going to define bifurcating in a moment. But for those of you who have subscribed to Tyrone Bowman Live, thank you for your subscription. It means a lot. We're on the road to getting 2,000 subscribers to this channel. For those of you who are new to the channel, this is a channel we deal with serious topics and issues, and we have conversations about them and analysis. So consider subscribing to Tyrone Bowman Live. So let's get down to this topic today. Has World War III begun? This article was written by Corey Shake for the Dispatch. The word bifurcate or bifurcating means to cause to divide into two parts, to cause to divide into two branches or parts. To divide into two branches or parts. An example would be the stream bifurcates into two narrow channels. So let's get down to the essence of this story. With land wars in Europe and the Middle East and tensions running high in Asia, speculation has only grown louder that we are on the brink of or in the early stages of World War III. We are not. There has not been a foreign attack on the U.S. homeland that would motivate the country to undertake a major national effort to preserve our freedom. Governments allied with the United States are not being toppled or their territories occupied. Major powers are not fighting each other directly. U.S. troops are in combat in relatively small numbers for limited regional purposes. But a world war is approaching. The international order is bifurcating into ideological spears again, with one spear consisting of the United States and other countries attempting to preserve gains of freedom and prosperity from the last 35 years, and another spear consisting of countries that consider those gains to have come at their expense or endanger their domestic control. This axis of agreed countries includes China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. They are building the military forces to defeat us, deepening their cooperation with each other, committing acts of sabotage against us, using the openness of our societies to suborn our publics, testing our willingness to defend ourselves and our allies. American strategy since the end of the Cold War in 1991 has been to expand the geography of free societies, particularly in Europe. It sought to advance that cause cautiously by blurring the lines between where we have undertaken solemn commitments and where we have not. So, for example, rather than hurriedly admitting former Warsaw Pact and Soviet states into NATO or the National Atlantic Treaty Organization, as they desperately wanted the U.S. invented. A partnership for peace as an intermediate step, providing some connection to the club of countries for which the U.S. assumed the responsibility that an armed attack against one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack against them all. The objective was to move incrementally so that Russia had time to accumulate to the new reality of its dismantled power. It also served to condition the U.S. public so that by the time the question was posed of whether Poland should be allowed under the U.S. security umbrella, the answer was, are they already? What China and Russia have already succeeded in doing is brutally clarifying the line between what countries the U.S. will defend and those we will not. By impelling weaker states, they have challenged the U.S. to prove we will protect them. And the last several U.S. presidents have balked. President George W. Bush committed to withdrawing U.S. troops from Iraq, leaving a government in transition subject to Iranian meddling. President Barack Obama infamously extended, then failed to make good on threats to Syria's Bashar al-Assad. President Donald Trump threatened to abandon NATO, declined to retaliate for Iranian attacks on Saudi Arabia, and now encourages Russia attacks. President Joe Biden has tempted China to test his obliged commitment that the U.S. would send troops to defend Taiwan, something he has done 4 times and has been hurriedly corrected 4 times by administration officials. The humiliating scenes of hurried U.S. abandonment of Afghanistan and insistence of its inevitability by both the president and his national security advisor surely causes allies to question Biden's commitment and tempt adversaries to test them. Most conspicuously, the president, so this was written some time ago, but it's a good article, has telegraphed his fear of wider war since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As Russia invaded, Biden rushed U.S. National Guard trainees out of Ukraine. He insisted there would be no direct involvement, such as providing aircraft to Ukraine or imposing a no-fly zone, saying that the U.S. helping uphold the sovereignty of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory would start World War III. While promising to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes, the Biden administration hesitated to provide weapons when needed to Ukraine, often being shamed into relenting or refusal only after European allies, the countries more at risk than the U.S. from a Russian attack, had already done so. President Biden has excluded Ukraine from our defense perimeter, just as Truman-era Secretary of State Dean Acheson excluded South Korea in 1950, drawing the line at committing the U.S. to defend every inch of NATO's territory. Such actions encourage the access of agreed to continue chipping away at the security of other states we are allied to or care about or rely on for our prosperity. Our enemies have regional ambitions for conquest and are working to keep the U.S. out because without the strength of the United States, our regional allies would not protect themselves. Russia threatens nuclear use if the U.S. aids Ukraine, hoping to forestall assistance. China attacks Philippines Coast Guard ships, hoping the U.S. won't come to their aid, although they are treaty allies of the U.S. North Korea fires missiles over the Sea of Japan and conducts espionage operations against South Korea, testing whether it can be peeled from the U.S. defense umbrella. Iraq attacked Saudi Arabia, hoping rightly it turned out that the U.S. would balk at retaliation. Their idea would be a world war without American participation, because it could result in China dominant in Asia, Russia dominant in Europe, North Korea dominant on the Korean Peninsula, and Iran dominant in the Middle East. Those who fear the U.S. having to fight to honor our allied commitments are seeking clever legalistic loopholes to avoid war, such as pointing out that the NATO treaty technically commits the U.S. only to consultations should an ally be attacked. Such finessing ignores the strategic consequences of what would unquestionably be understood as the U.S. abandoning a commitment we had upheld for 75 years. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte is right that free societies need to shift to a wartime mindset. In other words, a nation must always be prepared to defend itself, irregardless of whether the threat of war is pending or not. Just like in everyday life, I want to put it in language that we can all understand. In everyday life, we were taught never let your guard down. Always keep your guard up. Always be aware of your surroundings. Pay attention to everything, everyone, and everybody. Don't let people catch you off guard. These are the lessons that our parents taught us growing up in the hood. And when you grow up in the hood, like I did, you constantly must be in a defensive, offensive mode, 24/7, whether you want to be or not. Why? Because you walk in the streets. You're walking in the Badlands, quote unquote. You're walking in gangster territory, and you don't know if you're gonna make it home or not. Many people just go to the store, not realizing sometimes it turns into a war zone. So that's everyday language. Now let me get back to this article, and I'll be breaking it down, and I'll put it in language we can all understand. So NATO allies, including the U.S., lack the weapons and ammunition to fight wars of high intensity. America doesn't like to engage in long, protracted wars. They want it quick, they want it fast, they want it to hurry up and end. Because remember, the Vietnam War was a disaster for America. And do you know how much money the government paid to rebuild Vietnam? And what bothers a lot of the people that I know who were in Vietnam to this day, those brave men who went over there and fought a senseless war, many of them are suffering right now with illnesses, disease. Many of them came back maimed. Many of them still can't get the help that they need for medication and things because they have stripped them of every benefit that they could possibly have. That's why President Lyndon Baines Johnson did not run for re-election because of the Vietnam War. The late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in one of his final speeches at Riverside Church in New York City, what did he talk about? He talked about his opposition towards the Vietnam War. Many people said he was wrong on that, but history has proven that he took the right position. Let's ask this question. If rich people are so willing to take the sons and daughters of everyday people that they consider not to be important and put them on the battlefields and send them out to die for what? For oil, for gold, for silver, for cocaine? Well, why can't their sons and daughters go into the military and be put on the front lines as well? Many of the politicians right now, what did they get? They got deferment. They used their political connections so they didn't have to go to war. Then they want to call people unpatriotic because they don't want to go and get shot up and maimed and messed up and come back home and have a colostomy bag attached to their bodies for the rest of their lives. And they have to have all types of medication and stuff to cope. And they go down to the VA, the Veteran Affairs Administration, and they give them the wrangling and all this kind of foolishness. I know people who are dealing with this right now. And some of you watching, or some of you who will watch, and even around the world in other countries, guerrilla warfare is not what people think it is. People get hurt, people get maimed, people become homeless, children get killed innocently. Over in Africa, what do they have? Child soldiers that they put on the front lines. And even in some of the Arab lands, they are taught. They teach their children how to fight. So don't think that World War III is not pending, because from the way stuff is going right now, we don't know what's going to happen. So Russia now commits a third of its government budget to defense and has retooled its economy to military production. North Korea is providing Russia the troops it needs for the war in Ukraine. Iran is providing its drones, and China is providing the war material. The best and cheapest way to win wars is to prevent enemies from believing they could win. So that's a mindset. It's a psychological mindset. The late, great Muhammad Ali, may he forever rest in peace, he was a psychologist. He was a master in the ring when it came to mind manipulation. The majority of his opponents don't know it, but they were outwitted and destroyed psychologically even before he got into the ring, because he got them so worked up until when they got into the ring emotionally, they forgot about all that training. And he obliterated them and destroyed the majority of them because he messed up in their minds. Protect your mind, ladies and gentlemen. Keep your mind sharp. Keep your mind crisp. Keep your mind clear. Don't let people put all kind of garbage and trash in it, because you must be prepared. So they're invoking the Defense Production Act to accelerate weapons and ammunition production, Russia is, and recruiting a larger conventional force. Those measures would strengthen the U.S. military and likely prevent an attack on our country. Hard choices and hard work will be needed to rebuild our military strength. Money will need to be diverted from other worthy and pressing needs. Young Americans will need to be persuaded into service. Comfortable practices will need to be disrupted. We will need to let our military force on its core mission and leave it out of cultural wars. And leaders will need to act as statesmen. These elements were little in evidence in the Biden administration, and the Trump administration will add new challenges, as it already is. Remember when Hollywood used to make great war stories back in the day? They don't make them anymore. Black Hawk Down, that was a great movie. Remember all the war movies, The Dirty Dozen, etc. Why? Because it was wartime. But those measures alone wouldn't be sufficient to prevent attacks on allies, because our enemies will be tempted to test our willingness to protect countries we have committed to protect. The Ukraine war is a providential warning of how strong and threatening our adversaries are becoming. If we are to prevent the corrosion of the international order, we will need to restore the credibility of our commitments. And that means giving less weight to our fears and engendering greater concern on the part of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Otherwise, the U.S. will be left standing like a walled medieval city itself, safe but impoverished and surrounded by hostile forces. Never forget the mythological tale about the city of Troy. The city of Troy was a city, and its strength came from its fortified walls. Its enemies could not penetrate their walls, and the enemies of Troy knew it. So how would they get advantage to destroying the king of Troy? Simple. Pretend to be his friend. Pretend to make a false treaty. And what did they give the king? A Trojan horse. But what the king did not know, that the military was inside the Trojan horse that was larger than life. After they partied, after they drank, after they had sexual orgies and everybody was drunk, the army came out of the Trojan horse and they destroyed the city of Troy and killed its leader. Never let your guard down. Always be prepared. Never surrender. Never quit.